He thought it was a joke, a little girl proudly saying her mom was in the special forces. The smirk on his face turned into laughter, and the room joined in. But behind those laughs was a child fighting to hold back tears, wishing the world would believe her truth. Racism doesn't always come as a punch. Sometimes it hides in mockery and disbelief, in the way people dismiss your voice. But what happens when the very person they laughed at suddenly becomes undeniable? Would you still laugh, knowing her truth could silence you forever? Hit like and subscribe to join our community. For Maya, school was supposed to be a safe place, a place where books, not people, judged her worth. She was only 12, quiet by nature, the kind of girl who kept her head down but carried pride in her heart. That pride came from home, from a mother who taught her to walk tall even when the world tried to shrink her. Her mom wasn't just her hero at home. She was a soldier, disciplined, resilient, someone who had faced battles Maya could barely imagine. To Maya, that strength was her anchor. But in a world where skin color often decides how people see you, her words carried less weight than they deserved. At school, whispers and side glances followed her like shadows. Teachers rarely called on her, and when they did, her answers were often met with smirks instead of praise. Classmates laughed at the way she spoke, questioned the truth of her stories, and treated her pride in her mother as something laughable rather than admirable. Still, Maya held on. She believed that if people could just see her mom, if they could witness the woman behind her words, they would understand. What she didn't know was that the moment of truth would come sooner than anyone expected, and when it did, the laughter that haunted her would echo back with a different meaning. It started small, the way cruelty often does. A few kids in Maya's class whispered when she walked by, rolling their eyes whenever she mentioned her mother. But on this day, the laughter wasn't hidden in the corners. It was loud, bold, and encouraged by the very person meant to protect and serve. A police officer had been invited to the school to give a talk about safety and community. He was confident, commanding, the kind of man who believed every room belonged to him. When the discussion turned to bravery and service, Maya raised her hand. With quiet pride, she mentioned her mother, explaining how she served in the special forces, risking her life for the country. The room froze for a moment, but then came the smirk. The officer chuckled, shaking his head as if she had just told a child's fantasy. "Special forces? Your mom?" He mocked, his tone dripping with disbelief. Laughter erupted across the classroom, echoing through the walls. Maya's face burned, her chest tightened, and the world around her blurred into a haze of humiliation. For Maya, this wasn't just about being called a liar. It was about being reminded, yet again, that her words carried less weight because of who she was. Her truth wasn't respected, her pride wasn't validated. Instead, her classmates saw a chance to pile on the ridicule, their giggles feeding off the officer's authority. The injustice cut deep. Maya had been taught that uniforms meant respect, that those in power stood for fairness. But here was a man in uniform, using his position to tear her down. Every laugh in that classroom wasn't just at her expense. It was at her mother's sacrifice, her family's honor, her very identity. She sat there in silence, tears threatening but never falling. In her heart, though, something shifted. The weight of humiliation pressed hard, but beneath it was a quiet defiance. She knew her mother's truth, and she held on to it like a lifeline. What the officer didn't know, and what the class would soon learn, was that the truth always has a way of walking into the room. The officer's laughter still echoed when the classroom door opened. At first, no one noticed, but the moment she stepped inside, the air shifted. Maya's mother carried herself with a quiet authority that needed no introduction. Her uniform was crisp, her posture unshakable, and her eyes locked straight onto the man who had mocked her daughter. The officer's grin faltered. The children, once laughing, fell into uneasy silence. Every shuffle, every breath seemed to freeze as they realized the truth Maya had spoken was standing right in front of them. Maya's mother didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence alone filled the room with a gravity that demanded respect. Each patch on her sleeve, each medal glinting in the light told a story of sacrifice that none of them could deny. And in that silence, the weight of every laugh, every sneer, every doubt crushed down on those who had doubted her daughter. For Maya, it was a moment of both vindication and heartbreak. She had longed for this truth to be seen, but she had never wanted it to come at the cost of humiliation. Still, seeing her mother's calm, unshaken strength made her chest swell with pride. The officer shifted uncomfortably, his authority stripped away in an instant. The man who had mocked a child was now the one shrinking under the gaze of someone who had faced real battles, battles he could never understand. And in that fragile silence, one truth became undeniable. Racism, no matter how it disguises itself, in laughter, in disbelief, in mockery, crumbles when confronted by undeniable reality. The room, once filled with laughter, now held something else entirely: shame. The classroom never returned to laughter that day. Maya sat straighter, her tears now replaced with quiet pride, while her mother stood as a living reminder of the truth no one could deny. The officer's voice, once loud and mocking, fell silent. For the first time, the children who had ridiculed her felt the sting of shame, not because Maya had changed, but because they had finally been forced to see her as she always was, worthy of respect. Afterward, whispers replaced the laughter. Some students apologized in their own awkward ways, while others avoided her gaze entirely. But for Maya, the damage had already been done. The sting of disbelief left its mark. And yet, in the shadow of humiliation, something powerful had bloomed. She had witnessed her mother's strength not just in combat boots, but in silence, dignity, and presence. That strength became hers, too. This story isn't just about one girl or one moment. It's about how racism often hides behind doubt, mockery, and disbelief. It's about how quickly people dismiss a voice because of where it comes from, or the color of the skin that carries it. And it's about the courage it takes to hold on to truth when the world laughs in your face. So the question is this: how many times have we stayed silent, laughed along, or turned away when someone else was being diminished? How many Mayas have we ignored because it was easier to believe the lie than to face the truth? One act of mockery can wound a child, but one act of courage can silence a room. The choice, as always, is ours. If this story touched you, don't just watch. Be part of the change. Hit subscribe and join our community of voices that matter.